Now, it's not often, it really isn't often, that I get to talk about someone who was a chess master. Of a sorts, he wasn't particularly successful, but he certainly did try it. An author and an admiral. And a fairly successful politician. And the father of the Regia Marina. And one could say, the man who set the culture for the modern Italian Navy to this day. And today, I get to talk about Simone Antonio Saint-Bon. Or Simone Antonio Pacoret de Saint-Bon, depending on who you're talking to, and whether they want to use his full name. He's born in March 1828 in Chambly, and he dies on 26 November 1892 in Rome. So he is definitely a 19th century officer. And some have called him the Italian answer to Mahan. He certainly writes a paper which he uses to very effectively argue the case for maintaining a fleet. Unfortunately, Thoughts on the Military Navy, which he wrote, I have never managed to find a copy of. In Italian or English. So if anyone knows of a copy that you can acquire, please do send me the link, and I will do my best to acquire it. And then I will question the next day why I never have enough money for anything, and why I always seem to be scrambling to, have the money when emergencies come about. But we all know. I know the reason, you know the reason. It's because when I managed to track down copies of these wonderful historic books, I'm a sucker. I'm an absolute sucker. I know it, and I know I should probably, I should be trying to hold it in. I should try and hide it in my interest and not do it, but I am probably an absolute sucker, and they probably overcharge me every single time. I try my best, but, what can I say? I love it too much. I really should hire someone to go doing it for me, but that would cost even more money, and I'd have to really trust they both would know what they were doing, and wouldn't be out to diddle me. Financially, I mean. Yeah. Used to have someone like that. Unfortunately, they retired. They were great. But no, this is Simone Antonio Pacoret de Saint-Bon. And he is so many things. He's even a highly decorated naval officer. He is the bit of the Battle of Lissa which is pretty much successful for the Italians. Think about that. When he takes part in the Battle of Lissa, the bits he's involved in, it's successful. His is the great story which comes out of the Battle of Lissa to salvage Italian honor and pride. So, yeah. And he does that with the royal ship Formidable. And I'll be talking about both these things as we go on. But broadly speaking, this is going to be an introduction to a man who, more than any other, set the timbre that was going to start up the Italian Navy. And some of the things he favours and some of the things he argues for, you can see today still reflected in Italian naval thought and how they approach things, which has led to some really interesting differences between them and other navies in the world. One of the things we can talk about is how the Italian Navy, compared to other Western navies, they have a lot of guns. They have a certain amount of firepower. And one of the key tenets of Simone Antonio Pacoret de Saint-Bon, once you learn how to say a name, you can say it quite fast, is that you need to have enough weaponry. Your ships need to stand apart. You can't maybe build up as many as other larger powers, therefore you need your ships to be powerful in presence and capability so they stand apart. I'd argue that basically sums up the modern Italian naval approach to warship design and equipping. They have to stand out in ability and firepower. They do. And it all comes from this man. And he got all these chances because of what he achieved with this, the Formidable. Now, the interesting thing with this vessel, of course, is it's built in France. And it kind of shows how good some of the ships the French could build this time were. And the trouble is for the French Navy is they could never build more than one or two. And then someone else would go, I have a bright idea and let's change this. Remember, bright ideas are good things when they are worked through and properly fleshed out, and when you are able to put them into a proper sized class that you can therefore operate together. When you have a collection of ships which are all individual bright ideas, you don't so much have a force you can use together as something which looks nice as a display case. In the case of the Formidable, well, she's a good vessel built with, along with her sister, Terrible. And she is built at Le Saint-Simon, and the Forges et Chantiers de la Mediterranean. So, it's a Mediterranean shipyard in Le Saint-Simon. And initially conceived as floating coastal defense batteries, but they were changed and evolved and actually became armoured corvettes with only 20 guns. Basically, they dropped 10 guns, but they had the ability to move themselves. And they were pretty strongly built. They are classified by most people as second-class propeller-driven armoured ships. They are fairly decent. They are laid down 1860, launched 1861, entered service in 1862. They finally leave service 1904. They displaced up to 2,800 tons, depending on what you're looking at. Theoretically, their normal load is roughly 2,600 tons, but there are some really interesting figures around that, and theoretically, a full load is 2,750-ish tons. But again, there are some. This is why I said up to 2,800 tons, because there are some interesting figures wandering around. Their length between perpendiculars was 64 meters, and overall 65.8 meters. Their beam was 14.4 meters. Their draft was 5.45 meters. And that's all in Italian and French units, because it's an Italian ship built in a French yard. So yes, they used metric. 6 boilers provided power to a single expansion steam engine, giving them roughly 1,000 horsepower, i.e. they had about as much horsepower as a Merlin engine would produce for a Spitfire at the beginning of World War II. And the propeller, full sailing rig with a schooner-style sailing rig, and a top speed of 10 knots. Could do 1,300 nautical miles at 10 knots on their fuel, but of course with their full sailing rig, they could theoretically sail further. And they carried 4 203mm, that's 72-pounder in old money, smoothbore guns, and 16 160mm or 32-pounder guns. And their armour was 115mm belt. However, at certain points, it is 100mm, so it's 100 to 150mm depending on the belt and depending on what we're talking about. But it's a fairly decent armour belt. We're talking 4 to 4.5 inches. That's not something anyone's going to really demur about. And even before Saint-Bon gets in charge, of her, she has a pretty good career. When the Third War of Independence begins, Formidable and Terrible are stationed in Ancona. By June, they are recalled to the Southern Adriatic and are, joining fleet operations off the coast of Manfredonia. They land some troops in Ancona on the afternoon 25th of June, and they're basically doing all the duties they can do. And then they go to the return to the Marsh region to refuel, and they even take part in the not quite a battle with Tegetov under the command of Admiral Carlo Pellino de Passano that takes place on the 27th, 28th of June. It's one of those scenarios where you have lots of ships coming near each other. Formidable and her sister are absolutely critical to this, despite the fact they had been in the process of unloading guns to be transferred to the Principe de Cariano, the steam frigate. They leave with what they have. They join the other force under the command of Persano, and basically the formation stare at each other, and Tegetthoff decides that battle's not sensible at this point. He doesn't have an edge either way, especially not tactically, so he withdraws. Now, the Battle of Lissa we always talk about is the events that happened on the 20th of July, 1866. But the thing is, there's a lot of stuff which happens before it, which leads up to it. And this is often included in the Italian version of the battle. And there's some good reasons. For starters, there's the fact that the Battle of Lissa, despite them having 32 ships and having the theoretical advantage and strength, they lose. The Austro-Hungarian fleet under Tegetthoff manages to smash through the Italians by decisive positioning, manoeuvring, and honestly command and control. And I've talked about Carlo de Persano, and I've talked about what issues happen in that battle before, so I'm not going to get into them here. There's a whole video on the Battle of Lissa. But what we're talking about now are really the events from the 16th of July onwards. The Formidable, when it set sail from Ancona bound for Lissa, where they are planning to do landing and amphibious operations, was under the command of then the frigate captain Simone Paquet de Saint-Bon. They were in formation with the steam frigates Re d'Italia and San Martino, and the gunboat the Palestro. Now, sorry. They then go for a cruise around the Adriatic a bit and do general naval stuff, trying to display force as you basically do in a war zone to try and stamp your command and control the ocean. And really, the belt we're interested in from the point of view of Saint-Bon's career starts on the 16th of July. And we normally think of the Battle of Lissa as taking place on the 20th of July and thinking about that battle, the naval battle, the really important. Well, there's a lot of stuff which leads up to it, and that starts early in July. On 16th of July, for example, the Italian fleet, the Regia Marina, set sail from Ancona bound for Lissa, and they are planning to land there. Formidable is under the command of Saint-Bon, and it's in formation with the steam frigates, the armoured steam frigates, the Re d'Italia and the San Martino, which I've talked about before, some of the most powerful ships the Italians have, and the Palestro, which was an armoured gunboat. Their plan was to bombard the forts located on the hills east of Port San Giorgio, and, for example, Fort San Giorgio itself. Now, they'd, of course, separated up the fleet to do these various bombardment tasks. They had some going off to the east of the island, some going off to the west, and various things, but bombardment begins at 11:30 hours on 18th of July, and continued, especially once the 3rd Squadron arrived to support the 1st and the 2nd Squadron, which were also doing various things, until sunset. They managed to put Fort San Giorgio and Schmidt and the Bentic Tower batteries out of action. And in many ways, Formidable was a key part of this already. But then on 19th of July, she received the order to move inside the inlet of Port San Giorgio. She was supported by the armoured steam frigates of 3rd Squadron, the Principe de Cardignano, the Castellafallardo, and the Ancona. And the idea was they would be annihilating the batteries of the Madonna. Now, those batteries are located at the end of the port, and you can't really fire at them when you're outside the port, but when you come into the port, they're going to destroy you as you come in. So the idea was they would force it with armoured ships, and by taking out those batteries and the Wellington Tower, they would therefore make the island defenceless and be able to take it at will. It's a nice idea, and if it works, it's a great one. They don't manage to get in till about 1700 hours. They enter the port. They manage to take apart one of the batteries, but Rear Admiral Giovanni Vacca, who was the commander of the 3rd Squadron, felt the space was too narrow to manoeuvre. It's interesting to note that after the Battle of Lissa on the 20th of July, the entire Austro-Hungarian fleet would be able to gather in there without any problems. So I think Vaca might have underestimated it, let's say. Let's say underestimated. Let's be nice to him. It certainly seems that the Simone did not agree with him. In fact, the Simone felt that Vaca was really not quite at his best that day, let's put it this way. And so decides to retreat. But that means they leave the Formidable behind. There is both the fact that she's being damaged, but also the fact that they don't actually check that the message is past her. After all, she's not one of his 3rd Squadron ships. She's another Squadron ship. She's been attached to the mission, so, not his loss. And they managed to carry on inflicting damage to the Austro-Hungarian batteries. They were only 300 to 400 meters away from those batteries. They moored that close. And some suggest they were even closer than that, but that's a whole debate. And it also depends on, I think, which batteries you're talking about. I think by the time we're talking about when they've inflicted the heavy damage and they are at the end of the day, and they're withdrawing, it's probably they're dealing with the batteries which are further away from them, which are 300 to 400 meters, not the ones which were closer. Formidable had been hit repeatedly, and she got serious damage to her funnel, some of the deck equipment, some hatches. The armour hadn't been penetrated though. And whilst there had been fires on board, and 14 dead and 30 wounded from a crew which was 742 fully. If they were at full crewing, they could have up to 742 people aboard. They were not doing that great. Some of the guns had been lost, and a shell exploded in a gunboat. Had caused issues because it had caused gas to go around the ship, and that had poisoned some of the crew as well. But they managed to withdraw. They managed to pull out. Simone looks for his senior officer, realizes he's left them, gets everything repaired as well as he can, and pulls the ship out. As they would last leave, though, this does learn some interesting things. They're credited with most of the damage. And when they do manage to rejoin the Italian fleet, Simone goes to Regia d'Italia, Pisano's flagship. That's the flagship of the guy in charge of the entire fleet. And asks for medical personnel, because no one is listening to him when he's asking them. And actually, the Pisano, you have to give him the credit here, sends the very own doctors and medical staff from his own flagship, from the Regia d'Italia, to the ship, to the Formidable. They note the serious wounded. They have a lot of people transferred to Washington, which was the name of the hospital ship with them. But because of her damage and because of how the crew had been left, this quite valuable asset with a good crew is unable to take part in the Battle of Lissa on 20th, and in fact is sent several miles away and is off with the Washington, the hospital ship, and trying to head for Ancona. And honestly, one of the interesting discussions you have, and this is not, of course, ever stated realistically, but there are some muttering at the time, was that Vaca, by abandoning them and leaving them and not supporting them as they withdrew, had lost this ship from the fighting line for the next day, and this was one of the finest trained crews they had available. So this was a really useful ship, and there's the whole question of, well, if you have Simone, you have Formidable, there you have such a good combination of a good captain and a good crew, does that change the result of the Battle of Lissa? Possibly not, because they're still going to have the command and control issues, but there again, that's also one of the few ships where you've got a crew who can reliably act on their own, given a commander's instructions. So that could have changed things. Probably not a lot, but it might not have made it the stonking victory which is achieved. But for all his operations there, Simone receives the gold medal of military valor, and Francisco Contaduska, second-class gunnery sailor, also receives a very high honor, and they are rightly praised because they had silenced the batteries. They had made it possible that if it hadn't been for naval battle, which is lost the next day, the island of Lissa could have been taken. The island of Lissa could have been taken. But now it's Shameless Book Plug time. So it's time for the Shameless Book Plug, and this is where I get to say thank you to all of you for supporting the channel, for liking, sharing, subscribing, all those things which help the channel grow. Especially to the people who, and this is the important thing to remember whenever you're liking and subscribing to a channel, make sure when you click on the subscribe button, you decide what you want the bell to be, because otherwise YouTube, their algorithm seems to sometimes pick out videos for you, sometimes not. It's only if it's a filled-in bell are you guaranteed to see those videos, and that really matters to subscribers, to content creators, because it doesn't matter whether they're historians, whether they are music creators, it doesn't matter what they are. Your subscribers and your members and the people who have the bells filled in, they really do matter, because it's the number of people who click and watch at least 10 minutes of a video in the first hour which really do make a difference in its logarithm, it seems. That's from my own talks and working it out with people, and from what basically bits of what I've heard, that's roughly what I put together. I'm not 100% sure of it, but it seems to work in my case. I know the videos I get which have higher views of over 10 minutes, preferably 20-something minutes, in the first hour, will mean that a video will go versus, and that there is a difference, and it does have an impact, and it's thanks to you watching the videos, and of course that's more likely to happen if you've taken control of your subscribe option and made sure that they tell you when the videos come out. But no, thank you for your support, and thank you for making it possible for me to replace the computer so quickly. I haven't been able to order it yet. I'm recording this early on Friday. I'm hoping paychecks will have arrived and I will have the final couple hundred I need to be able to order all of the components, and hopefully get the components here and fix up the computer over the weekend, maybe beginning of next week. We'll see when they all arrive. And that's all thanks to you. It's always cross fingers on paychecks, because this is the joy of contract work. Sometimes they remember and go, oh, it's the last Thursday a month, we'll make sure we pay you. Sometimes they go, oh no, we pay on the 28th of the month, and you go, that isn't exactly what you said, but they usually have the rule of, oh, well, we have to pay within a certain number of days of the last Thursday a month or standard payday, and you go, okay, fine, that's life. But yeah, hopefully it'll come in today, at least today. As they didn't all come in yesterday, and then I can order it all. But thank you for your support, thank you for making it possible, and thank you for making the whole channel possible with your support. All the research, all the stuff you fund is what makes it possible to do this channel, for me to do the other history work I'm doing, and for more books to be coming, and for me to shamelessly plug my books. So thank you. Now, during his tenure in the politics at the time, when he was in charge as Minister of Navy just from July 1873 to March 1876, then first Chief of the Staff of the Regia Marina, because he'd reorganised it so that it was going to be leading to that, and he was appointed in 1884. And there's a dispute over the early years, over exactly when he gets replaced. It seems to me like there might have been another officer, from what I'm understanding, there was another officer who was theoretically supposed to take over, but didn't realistically get to take over till about 1889, when he goes to become a senator of the kingdom, and then he's made Minister of Navy again in February 1891, and does that to September 1892. And he serves under Menghetti, Galati, and Reduni in their different governments. He is quite capable of quite a capable minister. He can survive the fall of a government. He is critical in developing the Italian Navy. He sets up its infrastructure policy. He sets up its training policy. The description of radical reorganization is not quite so the case. Okay, he certainly does introduce torpedoes and he certainly does bring in the specialty of the torpedo as a specialty, but that's not really what he's massively remembered for. That's his shaping of the battleship, specifically the Duilio class, which I'll be talking about in a bit. What he was focused on doing was the transition of the Regia Marina from being a collection of three nations' navies, realistically, into one navy. And building that navy for the future of Italy as a great power, Italy as a coming power. He wanted infrastructure. He wanted things to support it. He wanted structures and schools to support it. He didn't want them to be dependent upon other people for the things they needed to be. But he realized that these things all required development. They all required spending. And often it was considered radical was because he went, okay, so you want to build a force this big. That's great. We want this force. How do we sustain that force? What's the infrastructure we need to put in place? Because that is often how you have to work out what infrastructure you need. Okay? You start off with, these are our risks. These are our potential issues. We have Austria. We have France in the case of Italy. We have our needs in the Mediterranean. We have our status in the world. Okay, these are the reasons we need a fleet. We are a trading nation going around the world. We can be exposed to risk all around the world with piracy, etc. We therefore need to have presence where we need to have presence around the world. Okay, so these are what we need to manage. So this is the size of force we need to manage those risks, to manage those problems. Okay, how do we then sustain that force? And therefore we need to build, and then you build it in reverse order. So you work it out from the problems, then the size that justify the size of force and require it. Then you work out the size of force you need, and then you work out what you need to sustain that force. And then you build it in reverse. You build the infrastructure, you build the sustainment, then you build the force, and then you're able to manage the problems. And you can't really shortcut that. Well, you can, but the trouble is your shortcut's not sustainable. Because your shortcut is you buy that force from other people. And then you depend on their sustainment, their supplies, their infrastructure, to keep that force operational. And that's just not sustainable. That's not long-term sustainable, that's not short-term sustainable. That's just a bad position to be in. And Sambon, he's the guy who's really drumming this home into the Italian political classes. He is really pushing the infrastructure, the construction. He's using his gold medal for military valor, which is a very high status award he got for that event with the Formidable, to really stretch it, to really push. This needs to be done. We need a force, and it needs to be sustainable. But he also needs to build that force around something. He cannot just build that force around torpedoes or new technology. He's not impressed by necessarily the Je ne colle and the idea of shrinking everything. That doesn't catch hold in Italy, and that's largely, again, thanks to Sambon going, but that doesn't make sense. That only works if the enemy does what we want them to, and why are they going to play that game? The Je ne colle is a great idea. It's a really, really bright idea. The trouble is, it's once you think through, you go, oh, so the enemy has to A, not adapt to the changing situation and come with any counter defenses against those systems, and B, has to play the game as we've defined it. There are problems with those things. There are problems. This is why he pushes for things like the Duilio class. And his philosophy, broadly speaking, brought down to, especially when it comes to battleships, is big ships, big guns equals big status. We can't afford a lot of ships. We can't afford to have so many of them. But we can afford to build very good quality ships. And the Duilio class are very good quality ships. They are, well, they're interesting because once you start looking at their design and start looking through, you see they're very solidly built. They are kind of like, they are, as most of these turret ships and these casemate turret ships are, they are sort of an improvement of the concept of the monitor, where you've got basically a seagoing ship built around an armoured monitor, to give it stability and operational capability at sea, whilst also giving it the firepower and the strength it needs. Now, the really interesting thing about us is that they carry two 18-inch guns. Two 18-inch guns in each turret, for a total of 4. Think about that. They also carried a torpedo boat. They also carry a torpedo boat. And the stern, they have a little torpedo boat hidden in there that they launch out. It's a very interesting and very clever idea in so many regards of how they are built and how they are valued. They are designed also with as much assistance in loading as possible to make them as fast and as high a rate of fire as possible. They are muzzle loading, because the breech loading mechanisms available at the time were not safe. They just weren't. But they were still capable. And the ships themselves were capable of a top speed of, theoretically, 15 knots. It was only reached during trials, though. Practically, they seem to be 13-knot ships. And they displaced roughly 12,000 tons. They were critical. They'd been presented in March 1873. And if we go check the timeline, you realise 1873 is actually before he becomes Minister of the Navy for the first time. He had argued for these before he becomes Minister of the Navy. And then he gets them. He gets their capabilities while he's constructing as Minister of the Navy. So basically, he gets them, he sells them on the idea, and then when they go, Warren, we'll build these ships. That's great, thank you. That's what I want you to do. I want you to build these ships. Useful? Useful indeed. It's worthwhile noting, though, that they are actually, if you consider the Dandolo, which was Enrico Dandolo, and the Duilio, both are laid down in 1873-ish. Both are launched in, I think, the Duilio is launched in 1876, but the Enrico Dandolo isn't launched till 1878. The Duilio is completed in 1880, and it does have the torpedo boat on it. The Enrico Dandolo doesn't complete with the torpedo boat, and is finished in 1882. And later on they do land the torpedo boat, because whilst it was considered a good idea, it was a good idea when they were thinking about these ships going off around the world. When they realised they weren't going to go around the world, they were going to be important to their Mediterranean operations, they suddenly realised, well, in which case we've got bigger, better torpedo boats, which are going to be sitting here to escort them. They don't need to take a small third-class one with them. But still, if you consider for modern concept of operations of how we're looking at ships and how we're looking at uncrewed assets, these ships are ahead of their time. They are their own task group going off. They do have their little torpedo boat which goes out and escorts them and helps them reach out and cause trouble elsewhere. And big ships and big guns. They have very big guns. They are very high status assets. And when they are launched, other nations do have to take notice of them. Other nations do have to start looking and go, okay, what do we do? How do we deal with this? How do we get involved with this? It even causes the Royal Navy to look at it and go, this could be a problem. The Royal Navy's, as in the UK Royal Navy's main discussion was, we have enough ships we can swamp them, but we're going to have to swamp them if we have to fight them. We are going to have to turn up with 5 or 6 to those 2, if not more. And you can understand why. The Royal Navy building something with that big, that size, that form at that time, doesn't necessarily help them for their operations around the world. It just doesn't. In fact, arguably the closest equivalent from the Royal Navy in terms of timeline construction to these ships was HMS Inflexible, which was herself launched in 1876. Once you start looking at the other classes that come after it, they've got 16-inch, 12.5-inch guns. The Colossus class had 12-inch guns, and the Admiral class, which of course are launched, well, laid down in 1818 and launched in 1882, so are laid down and launched about contemporary with these vessels being finished. Well, they are mostly armed with 12-inch guns. A couple have 16. Bembo has 16.25-inch guns, and some have 13.5-inch guns. But mostly they are a long way off from the idea of having these big 18-inch guns. Why? Because it doesn't really work for the Royal Navy's needs to support it around the world. But for the Regia Marina, having these big guns is big status. It means, yes, you might be building 10 battleships, the entire Admiral class, and have others, but we have the two with the biggest guns, and that gives us a status here. And that's sometimes what small nations have to go for. They have to go for the status of the asset they're building, because they can't go for the numbers of it. And it's one of the interesting debates you get into with people is often going, well, why are these nations which are smaller building necessarily warships which are individually more powerful and larger than, let's say, major nation ships? And let's say America, even. If we're talking about, let's say, Korea's destroyers and versus the Sejong the Great versus the Arleigh Burkes. Well, for the Americans, they're building literally Arleigh Burkes they've built Arleigh Burkes constantly for years, and they have a huge number of them. Sejong the Great, they don't have so many of them. But if they want states of them, they need to have more firepower. They need to be these very capable ships which stand out. And so this is the legacy of Simone Antonio St. Bon. This is his legacy. He is the father of the modern Italian Navy, which is truly, and I would say this, truly is an archetypal force which does go for high status units. Their individual units are high status. They might build class on them, but they are still high status. You look at their OPVs, you look at their frigates, you look at their other vessels, the Trieste, the new HD is a classic example of this. They might not have many of them, but they're all high status. They're all high value. They're all something you're going to look at and go, okay, the Italians are here. The Italian Navy has arrived. And you're going to know they're there to be sensible. They're there to be a presence. And to me, it's all a legacy of Simone Antonio Pacoret de Sorbonne. I love saying that name. Simone Antonio Pacoret de Sorbonne. It's a great name. And his policy, what he built into the Regia Marina, and has been passed on into the Italian Navy after World War II and all these things, and to this present day, of we have to value the ships we have. They have to be capable. We aren't ever going to have as many as we necessarily need for all the tasks we want to do, and we're certainly never going to have enough to match in with the largest naval powers, because we have land borders, we have our own industry and infrastructure issues we have to account for. So those vessels we do have to be capable. And with that in mind, that thought in mind, I'd like you to think, as I always do finish these videos with a question, of this question. What's the legacy of other founding fathers on navies? I want you to think about the characteristics of modern navies, of navies today and their ship design, and how you see them, and think about, okay, when does this start, and who defined that at the beginning? Why is that continued? And it's a really interesting thing to start thinking about, because it's sort of a gateway drug thought process to what we call forensic engineering. When you start looking back through engineering trends on our overall fleet and go, when does this start? Who's involved when this starts? Who starts this off? That's the beginning of forensic engineering. When you say it's not that long a step from that point to when you start looking at individual ships and going, so they were designing this class and they claim it's for this mission, but they make this compromise and this compromise and this compromise, which all will affect that mission, but all benefit this other mission. So were they really concentrating on this mission, which they were selling it to the Treasury for, or was it really that mission? And that's when you start getting into fun with arguing with people going, well, this is what they've written, they've said they care about this, but this is the choice they've made when actually building the ship. But they say they care about this, but that choice doesn't fit with that. But they've written it's this, and you're going, yes. And that is a piece of solid evidence. Because they've written what their intentions were, or rather, they have written what they want people to believe their intentions are. The fact is, though, the construction doesn't match the intention. We have to figure out why. That's forensic engineering. Well, when you longer form scenario, as said, is what we call legacy of design philosophy. And I would argue Antonio Pacoret de Sorbonne has legacy of the Italian Navy has been to build for each ship to be as individually as high status and as high capability as possible, to make up for numbers, to make up for infrastructure, to give them a more powerful presence beyond their numbers. And I think it's worked for them. What else have we got coming up? Right then, next week we have Emperor Pertinax, the Admiral Emperor, who's part of the year the period of five emperors, so not there for long, but still worth hearing about. And it's a very cool book which I've got to talk through, thanks to Simon. There we go, Simon Elliott's Pertinax book. That's to be discussing tomorrow. Discussing next Tuesday. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. And as ever, if you do like the video, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. And remember what I said about the bell. It matters. For everyone. Not just me, but for everyone. It really does matter.